Welcome to, let's see, we're in class number 4 now. Class number 4, and today we're going to begin our adventure in Lightroom. Adobe Lightroom Classic. That's the software we're going to use for editing photos. And in this sequence of videos, I'm going to introduce and talk about why Lightroom Classic. Second, we'll do how to import photos, which is the process of getting the photos from your camera to Lightroom. And then third, we'll walk through the what's called the basic panel. We'll do some basic edits to your photos, and we'll do all those things. So it's quite an adventure. This is the part of the class. It's one of my favorites because the software allows me to finish my photos. It allows me to add an extra layer of me to my photos. And here's what I mean in a short version by that. Let's say you and I were taking photos with the same camera, same lens, of the exact same thing at the same time and place. Let's say the photos looked very similar or identical. To make them each our own, then what we can do is in software, finish them in our unique ways. So I might make some color changes that you might not make. I might change the brightness that you might not make. I might do some other things. I might crop it to a different view of the scene. So all of that stuff lets me finish the photo in my way. So that's why I like software in finishing the photo. I don't think it's cheating. Some people think, well, when you take the photo, you're done. If you think about it, if you think using software is somehow fake or cheating, here's my argument for that. The minute you take a photo, the minute you point a camera at something, you're changing it. It's not real. So the camera isn't a photocopier. It doesn't take and exactly what it was is what's captured. There's lenses, there's depth of field, and if nothing else, the way you and I see it is 3D, so we have depth. This converts it to 2D. There's an illusion of depth, but not really depth. Plus, the minute you take a photo, you're choosing to exclude some things that when you or I were there looking at it, we saw in our peripheral vision. So it's different, and that's one of the reasons I really like photography, is it allows me to say, this is what I saw, this is what I paid attention to, and then the software allows me to finish it to make it even more mine. Enough of that. So why are we using Lightroom? And specifically, why are we using Lightroom Classic? I'll get to that in a minute, but first I want to talk a little bit about what I call the map to Adobe Lightroom Classic, the map to Adobe Lightroom Classic. I like making up acronyms, and this acronym, the MAP, stands for the Michael Approved Process. So this is, it's not, let me be clear, it's a technical thing. So there's some technical steps we're gonna do in Lightroom. It's organizational things, that's a better way to put it. It's organizational processes that I want to teach you very specifically that you need to follow for class. They happen in two places. The first is in the import process. There's some specific things I will teach you. The second is an export process. The nice thing is once you get them set up, you don't have to do much else with them later on. There's a couple little things you have to do, but it only takes 30 seconds on each end. Okay? Those things I'm specific about. The in-between part, the editing part, that's totally up to you. I'm going to demonstrate techniques throughout the quarter and some features that you can use, but it's up to you how to use those paintbrushes. That's not part of the map. The map is me showing you general structures and just hopefully kind of a fun name. So there you go. So also part of a fun name, there's two versions of Lightroom out there right now. One is called Lightroom and one is called Lightroom Classic. And Lightroom Classic is the one we're using in class. You will need to install this app if you haven't already. Hopefully you've installed it before you watch the video about import and basic panel, so you can walk through those processes with me on the video. Lightroom Classic and Lightroom not Classic, are two different ways of approaching the same thing. Lightroom Classic is based on computers. They both run on computers, but it's based on local storage, so your photos live here. Lightroom Not Classic is a little more cloud-based. It's where Lightroom will eventually go, I think. It'll probably be 3 to 5 years from now. Lightroom Classic will go away, but until then, all the features aren't available in Lightroom Not Classic yet, so that's why I'm not using it. Plus, I know how to use this one a little better. Anyway, so one of the questions people ask when we're talking about editing software is, why not use Photoshop? Why not use Photoshop? And that's a good question. Let's talk a little bit about Photoshop. I've been using Photoshop since 1994. So what's that? 26 years. Photoshop is 30 years old. It was created in 1990. And when it first came out, it shipped on these things. Remember these? Floppy disks. This is the first version I had. This was version 3.0. 3.0. This isn't, well, it's mine now. This was a company I worked with. They had some of these floating around and they were going to throw it out. I said, no, I want to keep it. So it shipped on, it came with 5 of these floppy disks. 5 floppy disks. These hold about 1.4 megabytes of data. If you know what a megabyte of data is, it's not very much. By reference point, your phone photos are somewhere between 5 to 7 megabytes. So they would, you need, it's as much as an original photo, this version of Photoshop took up on a disk. The current version of Photoshop is almost 3 gigabytes. So that's about 3 million times more data. It's just staggering. So I've been using it a long time. It's an awesome program. If you only have to get to learn one piece of software in your life, or you want software for your resume, Photoshop's a great one to learn. But because it's so powerful and it works on the pixel level, so you're dealing with the individual dots in the image, which gives you great power. There's a lot to learn. The learning curve is very steep. Now you can do it. I mean, there's lots of videos on YouTube. There's classes here at Highline. We have 2 Photoshop classes dedicated just to that. Photoshop 1 and 2, I believe they're called. Are 5 credit classes. Feel free to sign up for those. It's a great piece of software to learn. Because it's flexible. It does lots and lots of things, from basically photos to creating graphics. The graphics for this introduction that you saw at the first slide of this video was created in Photoshop. You can do 3D models, you can do lighting stuff, you can even do videos now, which is painful, but it does work. So super powerful. I often tell people, like I said, I've been using Photoshop for 26 years. And if this is Photoshop, this is how much I know and how much I use. Well, it's probably even this, okay? And I can use it quickly and fast, but there's so much of it I don't even really use because it doesn't fit with what I need. So that's a long way of saying it's really hard to learn. There's a lot to it. Not hard to learn. I can't teach it to you in 40 minutes or an hour. Here's an example. I used to teach a class where we would create graphics for Facebook. And so it was a simple graphic for the homepage image of a Facebook page. And it was a photo, a logo, some text, and we changed some colors. And it took 3 2-hour classes to do it, to teach the class of 20 people how to do it. It's something I can do in about 20 minutes, but I've been using Photoshop for 20 years. If you have to teach all the individual steps to make that work, it takes a while. So here's what Photoshop lets you do. And this is what people think of when they think of Photoshop. So the before photo at this wedding when they were having fireworks, I wanted to have more pizzazz in the sky, so I borrowed some fireworks from another photo of the same wedding. So let me show you the sequence. So here is the base photo, if you will. Some nice fireworks going off, but not spectacular. I wanted a little more color. So in this photo, there was some cool color in the fireworks and some different shapes and directions. So I isolated them, grabbed a couple other ones, and then blended them in to create this new composite, which is a blending of things. Now you can't do this in Lightroom. Lightroom is more the traditional things you could do back in the film days if you were in a dark room. But since we're using screens, they're light, it's called Lightroom. Yeah. So why Lightroom? Why Lightroom Classic specifically? Here's kind of in a nutshell why. This is the interface for this photo in Photoshop. And if I sat you down at a computer and said, do something, you might not know where to start. If you never had seen Photoshop before, it's kind of hard to know where to start. Same photo in Lightroom Classic looks like this. Oh, I bet if you look at it and you look on the right-hand side, you can see, oh, there's some controls, and I can see they've already been moved. Let me change them. So intuitively, I think you can sit down at Lightroom and start doing some things with a photo that'll get you pretty far down the road, as long as you don't need to do what I call major pixel surgery like I did in this photo to add the other fireworks or take things away. There's something you can do a little taking away with Lightroom, and I'll show that to you. I think we do that in the third time I featured demo of Lightroom. So that's Lightroom. Here's the real other reasons. It's so much easier to learn. When I'm in a classroom with y'all, we do this in one 2-hour class. Okay, so you will be functional, able to import photos from your camera, able to edit them in about 2 hours. Now, you're not an expert yet, but you can make photos tell the story you want better. You can fix technical defects, you can correct things, you can nudge photos in different directions artistically, so you can do that much more quickly than I can teach that same stuff to you in Photoshop. Another benefit of Lightroom versus Photoshop is Lightroom's also an organizer, and that's one of its main power features. Is I have over 100,000 photos, and they're all organized in Lightroom, so I can find almost any given photo if you give me a minute or two in Lightroom. I don't have to use my computer to do it. I can just do it all in Lightroom because it helps me organize photos. One of the cool things it helps you organize with photos, and probably the simplest and most overlooked way to organize photos, is to give your photos actual file names. So instead of img482.jpg for a file name for a photo, which doesn't mean anything, I can do Natalie and Brian's wedding, #1, number 2000. And so right away I can find those photos more quickly just by the file name. Photoshop doesn't really help you do that directly. When you do a save as, you can, but it's not the same. And it doesn't work on groups of photos. Photoshop only works on one photo at a time. Another powerful feature inside of Lightroom versus Photoshop, as you're making changes, so I'm dragging, changing exposure, the photo that I'm seeing on screen gets brighter or darker depending on what I'm doing. Photoshop can do that a little bit. It depends on the function you're doing. Some things change right away. Some things you get a little preview and you have to click OK and wait for it to render. It's just so much faster and less friction to editing photos the way most photographers want to edit photos. The edits are non-destructive. So that means when I make a change to exposure or anything, I haven't actually changed the original photo. And here's how that works. What I'm seeing on screen in Lightroom is what's called a proxy, because Lightroom's a database. Oh, it totally went nerdy on you there. So what I'm seeing on screen is a representation of what will happen to the original photo that's sitting over here untouched. It's saying reference this photo, show it on screen with these changes. That photo you're seeing on screen doesn't really exist anywhere except in the Lightroom database and your screen. You can't send that to somebody until you export it. So you're making a new copy when you export. You take the photo out of Lightroom and make a new copy, and the original is still the way it was when it came out of your camera. So that has a lot of power in that you always have the ability to change your mind. Even if you mess up a whole bunch, the original is fine and waiting for you to come back and say, let's start over. Photoshop can work that way a little bit, but it's not designed to work that way. There's workflows that'll let you do it, but it's tricky. And then basically all the tools you need as a photographer for editing photos for corrective purpose and artistic purposes are inside of Lightroom Classic and the other non-classic Lightroom. It's pretty rare that I need to go into a photo in Photoshop. If I have 1,000 photos I've edited, maybe 1 or 2, maybe, will end up in Photoshop for a minute or so, or a longer time. So that's why I prefer and use regularly on my photos Lightroom Classic. It's an awesome program. Most of the time people love it. They figure it out pretty quickly. They get in the zone of it, and it's just another layer of creativity with your photos. And one of the fun things that'll happen, and it happens to me, is as you're starting to be out creating images, you'll be thinking, okay, this is happening, but I'm going to do this with Lightroom because of that when I get back to the computer. So it becomes part of your photo making process, which is pretty fun. And as I mentioned, it's much easier to learn. So that's one of the big reasons. It's so much easier for me to teach you how to use and be pretty effective in Lightroom Classic than Photoshop. Let me show you some examples, some quick things that I do in Lightroom, some examples of how I edit and how the process works. So you take a photo starting here of this blossoming flower and make it look like this. It's a pretty drastic change, but it's color, it's enhancing, it's mood. I'm not, adding a second flower or doing anything like that. I just need these tools inside of Lightroom Classic to do this. And I'm going to show them all to you eventually, step by step. This sunset photo, which you've seen a little bit, here's what I edited. The changes I made. Sorry, sometimes I can't say edited, especially in the morning. All right. So before and after. Again, it's making it feel more like it felt. That's one of the things I really encourage you to do with Lightroom or whenever you edit your photos, is to bring the emotional content that you were thinking, noticing, feeling when you were taking the photo. I don't remember it looking like this. I remember it being vibrant and super dramatic, and this photo doesn't really feel like that. This one does. This church in London, I remember just feeling so impressed and dramatic, and it was quiet and grand. And this photo doesn't feel like that because it's kind of flat. There's not much contrast, not much color. It's just blue. And all this stuff that I bring out in Lightroom is already in the photo. I'm just enhancing certain elements. So when I go to here, all that stuff was there. I'm just nudging in different directions. It's kind of like cleaning off the grime a little bit. That's how I look at it sometimes. Bringing out what was really there, enhancing certain things, minimizing other things. You're drawing attention. So this doesn't take very long per photo. One of the things I really like about using Lightroom, besides the fact that it's much easier to learn, is I think of Lightroom as a 2-minute editor. Here's what I mean by that. Most of the time when I edit a photo in Lightroom, I'm not spending hours and days on a single image. That's not really how it's designed to work. It's relatively quick, and once you get more familiar with the tools, it'll be quick for you as well. So 2 minutes per photo. If you're spending a lot more time than that, especially after you've been doing this for a couple weeks, you're probably working too hard to rescue a photo that really isn't that interesting. You're trying to have the software fix what the camera and you should have, when you were creating the photo, done when you were at that point. So it's not going to rescue a photo that's yuck. So just be aware of that. But but I'm glad for that. That helps me create more interesting photos, helps me not get lazy, and I'm very grateful for all that. So that's Lightroom. We're going to start the adventure. Lightroom Classic, not Photoshop on floppy disk. Floppy disk. They're great coasters. There are even some extra ones in the box. I don't know who these are. I don't even have a way to read these anymore. Anyway, Lightroom Classic. We're going to start the adventure in the next video where we're going to work on import process, which does have some very specific steps you'll need to follow. So I will see you in that video whenever I see you there.